The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen such panic before. Ambassador Veltar watched as representatives from 1,000 worlds argued and shouted across the massive chamber. His crystalline body flickered with stress patterns that made the air around him shimmer like heat waves. The emergency session had been going on for 3 days now, and still no one had any answers. The Void Swarm had returned after sleeping for millions of years in the dark spaces between galaxies. Ancient records spoke of this threat, but most council members had thought them to be myths or stories told to frighten children. Now those stories were real, and the swarm was eating entire star systems. Veltar had seen the reports himself. The machine plague moved from world to world, consuming everything in its path. Planets that had taken millions of years to form complex life were stripped bare in days. The metal beasts that made up the swarm could copy any technology they encountered and adapt to any weapon used against them. Worse still, they seemed to learn from each battle, making them stronger with every victory. The Mind Weavers had tried to fight them with telepathic attacks, but the swarm had no minds to break. The ethereals had thrown pure energy at them, but the machines absorbed it and became more powerful. The mighty architects had built massive space fortresses, but the swarm had simply copied the designs and made better versions. Every advanced civilization in the galaxy had tried their best weapons and technologies, and all had failed. High Counselor Zephyrin stood at the center of the chamber. Her people were among the oldest in the galaxy, and their wisdom was respected by all. Even she looked defeated as she spoke to the assembled representatives. The translation devices carried her words to every corner of the hall in hundreds of different languages. "We have lost 700 worlds in the past month alone," she said. "Our combined fleets have been reduced to less than 30% of their original strength. At this rate, the swarm will reach the core worlds within a year. If we cannot find a solution soon, there will be nothing left of our civilization." The chamber erupted in voices again. Some called for retreat to distant galaxies, while others demanded they fight to the last ship. A few suggested surrendering, and hoping the swarm would show mercy, but everyone knew machines did not understand mercy. They only understood consumption and growth. Veltar had been listening to the same arguments for days. His own people, the Helix Federation, had already lost their homeworld. The beautiful crystal cities his ancestors had grown over millennia were now nothing but raw materials, feeding the endless hunger of the machine plague. He was one of the few survivors of his race, and the weight of that loss pressed down on him, like a mountain. "There must be something we have not tried," called out Representative Thylos from the insectoid hive worlds. "Some weapon or strategy we have overlooked. We have used every advanced technology known to our civilizations," replied Counselor Nex of the Silicon Collective. "The swarm adapts to quantum weapons, exotic matter manipulators, and even dimensional disruptors. It learns faster than we can develop new attacks." Veltar stood slowly. His voice carried the singing tones that all Helix used when speaking formally. "Perhaps that is exactly the problem. We keep trying to fight them with advanced technology, but what if the answer lies in the opposite direction?" The chamber grew quiet. Many eyes and sensory organs turned toward him. Some representatives looked confused, while others seemed annoyed that a survivor from a dead world would dare to speak. "What do you mean, Ambassador?" asked High Counselor Zephyrin. "The swarm adapts to our advanced weapons because they are technological constructs themselves. They understand energy manipulation, quantum mechanics, and exotic matter because those are the tools they use. But what if we used something they could not predict or adapt to? Something primitive." A chorus of dismissive sounds filled the chamber. Representative Kelvon of the Gas Giant Confederation spoke for many when he said, "Primitive weapons are called primitive for a reason, Ambassador. We evolved beyond such crude tools millions of years ago. Are you suggesting we fight advanced machines?" With rocks and sticks, Veltar felt his form dim slightly but pressed on. Not rocks and sticks, but perhaps there are young races in the galaxy who still use such methods. Races who have not yet evolved beyond the need for crude but effective solutions. "You mean the barbaric species," said Counselor Nex with distaste. "The ones who still wage wars with chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles. They would be slaughtered in minutes against the swarm, would they?" asked Veltar. "Has the swarm ever encountered such primitive tactics? Can it adapt to weapons it does not understand?" The chamber fell silent again. It was true that the Galactic Council had contact with several younger species, but most were considered too violent and backward to be granted full membership. They were tolerated as curiosities or studied from a distance, but never taken seriously as potential allies. High Counselor Zephyrin seemed to consider the idea. Her ancient mind worked through possibilities that others might miss. "There is merit to this suggestion," she said finally. "The swarm has only encountered our advanced civilizations. It may indeed struggle against tactics and weapons it has never seen before." "But which species?" asked Representative Thylos. "Most of the young races barely have space travel. They would never reach the battle zones in time to matter." Veltar had been researching this exact question for the past day. His people had been excellent record keepers before their destruction, and he had access to files that others might have overlooked. "There is one species that stands out. They call themselves humans, and they come from a world called Earth in the outer spiral arm." Murmurs of recognition rippled through the chamber. A few representatives nodded while others looked blank. "I remember them," said Counselor Zephyrin. "First contact was made perhaps 50 of their years ago. They were deemed too aggressive for council membership, but they showed remarkable adaptability and resilience." "They are primitives," scoffed Representative Kelvon. "Their technology is thousands of years behind ours. They still use gunpowder and nuclear fission. What could they possibly do that we cannot?" Veltar accessed the files in his crystalline memory and projected them for the chamber to see. Images of human conflicts filled the air above the assembled representatives. Battles fought with chemical weapons, kinetic projectiles, and crude explosives. Ships armored with metal plates instead of energy shields. Soldiers who fought hand-to-hand when their weapons failed. "Look at how they fight," he said. "They do not rely on a single advanced system that can be compromised. They build redundancy into everything. When their energy weapons fail, they use kinetic ones. When their shields drop, they rely on armor. When their technology breaks, they fight with their hands. The swarm may not know how to adapt to such crude persistence." The chamber studied the images in silence. Many representatives had never seen such primitive warfare. To their advanced sensibilities, it looked chaotic and wasteful. But there was something else there, too. A determination and ferocity that none of their civilized species possessed anymore. "They are certainly violent enough," admitted Representative Thylos. "But will they help us? We have had little contact with them since first meeting." "They will help," said Veltar with certainty. "I have studied their history and culture. They cannot resist helping others who are being destroyed by a greater evil. It is built into their nature. They call it heroism." High Counselor Zephyrin made a decision that would change the fate of the galaxy. "Very well. We will send a message to Earth. We will ask these humans for their help. May the ancient stars forgive us for what we are about to unleash." The message was sent that same day. It traveled across space using the fastest quantum communication arrays the Council possessed. On a small blue world in an unremarkable star system, the transmission reached Earth's United Defense Command. Admiral Hyun-Woo Kim received the desperate plea from creatures he had only heard about in classified briefings. The message was simple and direct. The galaxy was dying. Advanced civilizations that had existed for millions of years were being consumed by an ancient evil. Every sophisticated weapon and strategy had failed. The Galactic Council needed warriors. They needed survivors. They needed the impossible. Admiral Kim read the message 3 times before calling his staff. As he looked out at the stars from his orbital command station, he wondered if humanity was about to face its greatest challenge or its greatest opportunity. Perhaps they were the same thing. The call had been made. Now it remained to be seen if. The galaxy's last hope lay in the hands of a young violent species that still fought with fire and steel. Captain G. Park stood on the bridge of the UDS Indomitable as it dropped out of hyperspace near the Galactic Council's emergency staging area. Through the main view screen, she could see hundreds of alien ships from dozens of different species. Some looked like living creatures made of metal and crystal, while others seemed to be built from pure energy barely contained within force fields. The human ship looked crude by comparison. Where the alien vessels were sleek and elegant, the Indomitable was a blocky fortress of armor plating and redundant systems. Every surface bristled with weapons and sensor arrays. The aliens built their ships like works of art, while humans built theirs like tanks designed to survive anything the universe could throw at them. "Captain, we are receiving a transmission from the Council flagship," reported Communications Officer Tae-Young Lee from his station. "They are requesting permission to board and inspect our vessel." Ji-Hai nodded. "Tell them they are welcome aboard. Have Marine Sergeant Min-Ho Jung meet them at the airlock with a full honor guard. Let us show them what human hospitality looks like." The alien delegation that came aboard was unlike anything the human crew had ever seen. Ambassador Veltar led the group, his crystalline form refracting the ship's lights into rainbow patterns. Behind him came representatives from a dozen other species, including the insectoid Thylos, and something that looked like a walking cloud of glowing gas. Dr. Sojin Choi, the ship's xenobiologist, tried not to stare as she guided the aliens through the corridors of the Indomitable. She had studied theoretical alien biology for years, but seeing these creatures in person was overwhelming. Each species had evolved along completely different paths, and their technologies reflected that diversity. The aliens seemed equally fascinated and horrified by the human ship. They marveled at the thick armor plating and the multiple backup systems for every critical function. When Tae-Young showed them the weapon systems, their reactions ranged from confusion to disgust. "These are kinetic projectile launchers," explained Tae-Young as they stood in one of the weapon bays. "We fire metal, slugs at extremely high velocity. The larger cannons can punch through most known armor types. But where are the energy modulators?" asked Thylos through his translation device. "How do you adjust the quantum frequency to penetrate adaptive shielding?" "We do not," replied Tae-Young, simply. "We just hit things really hard with big pieces of metal." The aliens exchanged glances that clearly conveyed their dismay. These humans really were primitives. What had the Council been thinking when they called for help from such a backward species? Ambassador Veltar seemed less concerned than the others. His people had always valued practical solutions over elegant ones, and there was something appealingly direct about human methods. "Show us your defensive systems," he requested. Marine Sergeant Min-Ho Jung took over the tour at this point, leading them to the armor testing facility. The aliens watched in amazement as human technicians demonstrated the ship's protection. Multiple layers of metal and ceramic composites backed by energy-absorbing gels and self-repairing nanomaterials. When energy weapons hit our armor, the outer layers ablate away to disperse the heat, explained Min-Ho. The middle layers catch kinetic impacts and the inner layers seal any breaches. If all that fails, we have internal bulkheads that can contain damage to small sections of the ship. "What happens if your energy shields fail?" asked the gas being through its translator. "We do not use energy shields," said Min-Ho matter-of-factly. The silence that followed was deafening. Every advanced species in the galaxy used energy shields as their primary defense. The idea of relying solely on passive armor was unthinkable to them. "But how do you survive energy weapon attacks?" asked Thylos. "We build thicker armor," replied Min-Ho with a slight smile. Dr. So-jin led the next part of the tour, taking the aliens to the medical bay and research facilities. Here they encountered Chief Medical Officer Dong-hyun Yoon, who was studying samples of void swarm technology that the Council had provided. "Doctor, what have you learned about our enemy?" asked Veltar. Dong-hyun pulled up holographic displays showing the microscopic structure of swarm material. "Fascinating organisms," he said. "They appear to be self-replicating machines that can analyze and copy any technology they encounter. But there are limitations to their adaptation process." The aliens leaned forward with interest. Any weakness in the swarm could be the key to victory. "The adaptation process requires the swarm to understand the underlying principles of whatever weapon or defense they encounter," continued Dong-hyun. "They analyze energy signatures, quantum frequencies, and exotic matter interactions. But what if they encountered something that operates on principles they do not recognize, such as," prompted Veltar. "Chemical explosives," said Dong-hyun simply. "The swarm expects sophisticated energy manipulation, but a chemical explosion is just rapid oxidation. No exotic physics involved, just basic chemistry that releases energy through molecular bonds." Engineer Tae-young stepped forward with his own analysis. "I have been studying their adaptive algorithms," he said. "The swarm learns by observing patterns in energy flow and matter manipulation, but our weapons do not rely on those patterns. A kinetic projectile is just mass times velocity. There is nothing to adapt to except the simple physics of impact." The alien delegation absorbed this information with growing excitement. Could it really be that simple? Had they been overthinking the problem while the solution lay in returning to the basics of warfare? "There is more," added Dr. So-jin. "I have been studying the psychological profiles of the various galactic species. Every advanced civilization has bred aggression and violence out of their populations. You have evolved beyond the need for primitive warfare. But the swarm has only encountered these peaceful advanced species. It has never faced creatures that evolved from predators who solved problems through violence and determination." Captain Ji-hai had been listening to the discussion from the bridge, but now she joined the group in the research bay. "Dr. Choi is correct," she said. "Humans have not evolved beyond violence. We have simply learned to direct it more effectively. Every human child grows up hearing stories of warriors and heroes who fought impossible odds and won through determination and sacrifice. Your entire species is essentially a warrior culture," observed Veltar with something that might have been admiration. "Not exactly," replied Ji-hai. "We are builders and artists and scientists and philosophers. But when threatened, we can all become warriors. It is part of what makes us human." The aliens spent the next several hours touring the rest of the human ship and meeting with various crew members. They observed training exercises where human soldiers practiced fighting with both advanced weapons and primitive backup tools. They watched engineers who designed systems to be repaired with basic materials when sophisticated replacement parts were not available. Most shocking of all, they witnessed the crew's casual acceptance of danger and potential death. When Captain Ji-hai briefed her officers on the upcoming mission against the swarm, none of them showed fear or hesitation. They discussed tactics and logistics as if planning a routine patrol rather than a likely suicide mission. "Do your people not fear death?" asked Thylos during the final briefing. "Of course we do," replied Commander Yoon-ji Shin. "But we fear failure more. We fear letting innocent people suffer when we could have helped them. That fear drives us forward even when the odds are against us." As the alien delegation prepared to return to their own ships, Ambassador Veltar spoke privately with Captain Ji-hai. "I must ask you directly, Captain. Can humans really defeat an enemy that has destroyed civilizations millions of years more advanced than yours?" Ji-hai looked out at the stars where the void swarm was even now consuming worlds and killing billions of innocent beings. "I do not know if we can win, Ambassador," she said honestly, "but I know we will try." and we will keep trying until either the swarm is destroyed or we are. That is what humans do. When the aliens returned to their flagship, they carried with them detailed scans of human technology and tactics. More importantly, they carried something they had not felt in months: hope. These primitive warriors with their crude weapons and savage determination might actually have a chance against the seemingly unstoppable swarm. The Council emergency session that followed was unlike any in their history. For the first time since the crisis began, representatives were arguing about battle plans rather than evacuation strategies. The humans had given them something precious. They had given them a reason to fight back. Captain HFY received new orders within hours. The Indomitable would lead a mixed fleet of human and alien vessels to the edge of swarm territory. There they would test human tactics against the enemy and see if primitive warfare could succeed where advanced technology had failed. As her ship prepared for what might be the most important battle in galactic history, HFY reflected on the strange turn of events that had brought humanity to this moment. For decades, they had been dismissed as violent primitives, unworthy of serious consideration by the galactic community. Now those same violent primitive instincts might be the only thing standing between civilization and complete annihilation. Captain Dong-hyun Yoon gripped the armrests of his command chair as the UDS Relentless shuddered under enemy fire. Through the view screen, he could see the void swarm ships swarming around his fleet like metallic locusts. Each enemy vessel was a thing of terrible beauty, sleek and angular, with surfaces that seemed to shift and flow as they adapted to incoming attacks. The mixed fleet of human and alien ships had been fighting for 6 hours now, and the results were beyond anything the Galactic Council had dared to hope. Human tactics were proving devastatingly effective against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable just days before. "Target the large construct bearing 27 Mark IV, ordered Dong-hyun. "All batteries fire for effect." The Relentless unleashed a barrage of kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives. The massive tungsten slugs punched through the swarm ship's hull, while conventional warheads detonated against its surface. The enemy vessel tried to adapt its armor to the incoming fire, but there was nothing to adapt to. Metal hitting metal. At relativistic speeds followed basic physics that no amount of technological sophistication could overcome. Lieutenant Yoonji Shin monitored the tactical display from her position at the weapons console. "Direct hits, Captain. Enemy vessel is venting atmosphere and showing multiple hull breaches." "Confirmed kill," reported sensor operator Jae-ho Nam. "The construct has lost power and is drifting." Dong-hyun allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before turning his attention to the next target. This was the 15th swarm ship his crew had destroyed today, and each victory proved that human methods could work where alien technology had failed. The key was in understanding how the swarm functioned. The machine entities were incredibly sophisticated and could analyze any energy weapon or exotic technology within moments of first contact. They would then modify their defenses to become immune to that specific attack. It was an ability that had made them nearly invincible against the advanced civilizations of the galaxy. But humans fought differently. Where the aliens used elegant energy beams and quantum disruptors, humans relied on brute force and overwhelming firepower. A nuclear warhead did not care about adaptive shielding. Chemical explosives worked the same way they had for centuries, regardless of how advanced the target was. Kinetic projectiles were just pieces of metal moving very fast, and no amount of technological adaptation could change the laws of physics. Major Yoo-jin Han led the ground assault teams that were even now fighting to retake the industrial world of Kepler-7. The planet had been partially consumed by the swarm before the human fleet arrived, and millions of machine entities were still active on the surface. "Alpha Team, move up and secure that factory complex," Han ordered through her comm system. "Bravo Team, provide covering fire from the ridge line." The human Marines advanced through the ruins of what had once been a thriving alien city. Their powered armor was crude compared to the energy-based protection systems used by other species, but it was effective against the swarm's weapons. When plasma beams hit the ceramic plates, they simply ablated away, carrying the heat with them. When cutting lasers tried to slice through the armor, they encountered multiple layers of different materials, each designed to defeat a specific type of attack. Sergeant Wu Sung-oh led his squad through the twisted metal landscape that had once been a shopping district. The swarm had converted everything into raw materials for building more of themselves, but they had not expected to face an enemy that preferred demolition over preservation. Contact front, called out Corporal Mi-young Lim as a group of swarm. Drones emerged from the wreckage ahead. The machine creatures were humanoid in shape, but their bodies were made of the same adaptive metal as their ships. They moved with mechanical precision, and their arms ended in various cutting and drilling tools. The Marines opened fire with chemical propellant weapons that would have been considered antiques by galactic standards. Bullets and grenades tore into the swarm drones, which tried desperately to adapt their armor to the incoming fire. But there was nothing sophisticated to analyze. The bullets were just lead and copper moving at high speed, while the grenades were simple chemical explosives that created heat and pressure through rapid oxidation. Targets down, reported O, as the last drone fell with its chest cavity blown open by a grenade blast. These things do not know how to handle good old-fashioned explosives. The battle for Kepler-7 raged for 3 days, but the outcome was never really in doubt once the humans committed their full strength. The swarm entities were individually superior to human soldiers, but they could not adapt to tactics that relied on primitive solutions to complex problems. When conventional weapons failed, the humans switched to backup systems. When energy-based tools were compromised, they used manual alternatives. When sophisticated electronics were hacked, they fell back on mechanical devices that had no computer systems to subvert. Most importantly, the humans employed a level of violence and destruction that the peaceful galactic species found shocking. Where the aliens tried to minimize collateral damage and preserve infrastructure, the humans were willing to destroy entire cities to deny them to the enemy. Major Han made the decision that would define human military doctrine for the rest of the war. Rather than trying to retake Kepler-7 intact, she ordered her engineers to detonate the planet's geothermal power core. The resulting explosion vaporized everything within 1,000 kilometers and sent shockwaves through the planet's crust. "Sir, are you certain about this?" asked Engineer Kyung-soo Ryu as he prepared the charges that would crack the world open. "The Council representatives are not going to approve of destroying an entire planet. The Council representatives are not down here fighting these things," replied Han grimly. "Every factory and resource depot we leave intact becomes raw material for more swarm ships. Better to leave them nothing than to let them use our own infrastructure against us." The explosion that followed was visible from orbit. Captain Dong-hyun watched from the bridge of the Relentless as a quarter of Kepler-7's surface glowed white-hot from the artificial volcanic eruption. The swarm had lost not only their defensive positions, but also billions of tons of processed materials they had been planning to use for expansion. Ambassador Veltar was among the alien observers who witnessed the destruction. His crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated deep distress. "Captain Yoon," he said through the translation system, "your people have just destroyed a world that took millions of years to develop. The environmental damage will persist for centuries." Dong-hyun turned to face the alien diplomat. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "in 3 hours the swarm would have converted that entire planet into a factory for building more of themselves. Every day we let them keep those resources means more worlds will die. Sometimes you have to destroy something to save everything else." The concept was alien to most council species who had spent millions of years perfecting technologies that minimized harm and preserved life. The idea of deliberately causing massive destruction even for strategic reasons went against everything they had evolved to believe. But the results spoke for themselves. In 1 week of human-style warfare, The advancing swarm forces had been stopped for the first time since their return. 3 major enemy fleets had been destroyed, and dozens of partially consumed worlds had been denied to the machine plague. Dr. So-Jin Choi compiled the after-action reports that would be studied by military historians for generations to come. The humans had proven that primitive tactics could defeat advanced enemies, but the cost had been enormous. Nearly 40% of the human ships that entered combat had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Thousands of Marines had died in ground actions that alien forces would have avoided entirely. "The casualty reports are devastating," she told Captain Jihai during their post-battle briefing aboard the Indomitable. "We have lost more personnel in 1 week than most galactic species lose in a decade of conflicts." Jihai studied the numbers, with the calm acceptance that marked all human military leaders. "Dr. Choi," she said finally, "the galaxy was dying before we arrived. Entire civilizations were being consumed with no hope of resistance. Yes, we have suffered losses, but we have also proven that the swarm can be beaten. That knowledge alone makes every sacrifice worthwhile. The tactical data from the battles was already being transmitted to Earth, where human strategists would analyze every engagement and develop new methods for fighting the machine plague. More ships were being built, and more Marines were volunteering for what everyone knew would be increasingly dangerous missions." Word of the human victories spread throughout Council space faster than any official communication. Suddenly, the primitive warriors from the Outer Rim were being hailed as saviors by species that had existed for millions of years. Planets that had been preparing for evacuation began organizing resistance movements. Fleets that had been retreating toward the galactic edge turned around and prepared for counterattacks. The galaxy had found its champions in the most unlikely place. A young violent species that still solved problems with fire and steel had succeeded where ancient wisdom and advanced technology had failed. The void swarm was no longer unstoppable, but victory would require sacrifices that the peaceful species of the galaxy could barely comprehend. Admiral Sang-Min Kang stood before the largest gathering of military leaders the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from every surviving council species filled the massive war room aboard the orbital fortress that served as their combined headquarters. Holographic displays showed the current state of the conflict with the Void Swarm, and the news was both encouraging and terrifying. Human tactics had proven devastatingly effective against the machine plague. In 6 months of warfare, the swarm's advance had been stopped and several major enemy fleets had been destroyed. But victory was far from certain. For every swarm ship the humans destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The enemy was adapting not to human weapons, which remained impossible to counter, but to human strategies. "The situation is clear," said Kang as he gestured to the tactical display. "We have proven that the swarm can be defeated in battle, but we cannot win a war of attrition. They can replace their losses faster than we can destroy them. Every world they have already consumed gives them more resources to build new ships." High Counselor Zephyrin nodded grimly. "Our analysts estimate that at the current rate of loss, the swarm will have numerical superiority again within 2 years. Even with human tactics, we cannot sustain this level of combat indefinitely." Dr. Hae Jin Seo had been studying swarm technology since the first battles, and her findings were disturbing. "The enemy is not just building more ships," she reported. "They are improving their manufacturing processes. Each new generation of swarm vessels is more efficient and better armored than the last. They are learning from our attacks even if they cannot directly counter them." The assembled leaders absorbed this information in silence. Many had hoped that human intervention would quickly end the crisis, but it was becoming clear that conventional warfare could only slow the enemy, not stop them entirely. Engineer Wu Sung O stepped forward with a proposal that would change everything. "Admiral Kang," he said, "what if we stopped trying to fight a defensive war? What if instead of waiting for the swarm to attack us, we took the fight to them?" "Explain," requested Kang. The swarm operates from a central location in the void between galaxies, continued O. All our intelligence suggests that they have a primary control node that coordinates their expansion. If we could destroy that node, the entire network might collapse. The silence that followed was absolute. The void was the empty space between galaxies where nothing could survive for long. No ship had ever made the journey there and returned. It was considered a realm of death where even the most advanced civilizations feared to venture. Ambassador Veltar was the first to speak. "Engineer O," he said carefully, "no expedition to the void has ever succeeded. The distance alone would require more fuel than any ship could carry. The radiation levels would kill any crew within days. It is quite literally impossible." "Impossible for your ships, maybe," replied. "Oh, but human vessels are built differently. We rely on fusion reactors and chemical propulsion rather than exotic energy sources. We can carry more fuel and our armor provides better radiation protection. A modified human ship might be able to make the journey." Colonel Kyung-Soo Ryu had been quietly studying the proposal, and now he spoke up. "It would be a one-way trip," he said matter-of-factly. "Even if we could reach the swarm's home base, we would not have enough fuel to return. Any crew that volunteered would essentially be committing suicide. Then we had better make sure their sacrifice counts," said Admiral Kang. The plan that emerged from the following weeks of preparation was audacious beyond anything attempted in galactic history. A small fleet of heavily modified human ships would attempt the impossible journey to the void. They would carry the most powerful weapons the combined civilizations could provide, including experimental antimatter bombs that could theoretically destroy targets the size of small moons. Captain Mi Young Lim volunteered to lead the expedition despite knowing it was almost certainly a death sentence. "Someone has to go," she told Admiral Kang during their final briefing. "If there is even a small chance of ending this war, then we have to take it." The ship modifications took 3 months to complete. Every non-essential system was stripped away to make room for additional fuel tanks and radiation shielding. The crews would live in cramped conditions with minimal life support, but they would have enough supplies to reach their target and complete the mission. Dr. Hae-jin worked with alien scientists to develop the ultimate weapon for the mission. The antimatter bombs were unlike anything previously created, combining human explosive technology with exotic matter manipulation from the most advanced council species. Each device could release energy equivalent to a large star, and the fleet would carry 20 of them. "These weapons will only get one chance to work," explained Dr. Seo during the final technical briefing. "The swarm will analyze them after the first detonation and begin developing countermeasures. We must destroy their primary node with the initial strike or the mission will fail." Commander Jin-A Bayek would serve as the mission's military strategist. Her job was to plan the assault on whatever they found at the swarm's home base. "We know almost nothing about their central facility," she admitted. "It could be a massive space station or an artificial planet or something we cannot even imagine. We will have to adapt our tactics based on what we encounter." The alien representatives watched the human preparations with a mixture of admiration and horror. These primitive warriors were calmly planning their own deaths in service of a mission that had almost no chance of success. It was a level of sacrifice that their own peaceful species could barely comprehend. "Captain Lim," said Ambassador Veltar during the final ceremony before departure, "your species has already done more than anyone could have asked. You have saved countless worlds and given us hope when all seemed lost. No one would blame you if you chose not to make this journey." Lim looked out at the assembled fleet of modified human ships. Each vessel carried a crew of volunteers who understood they would never see home again. "Ambassador," she replied, "we did not come this far just to turn back when things got difficult. The galaxy is counting on us and we will not let them down. The Departure ceremony was broadcast throughout Council space. Billions of beings from thousands of different species watched as the human suicide fleet prepared for its impossible mission. Many wept for the brave souls who were sacrificing everything to save others they had never met. Major Tae-Young-nam commanded the escort squadron that would accompany the expedition as far as possible before fuel limitations forced them to turn back. "Remember," he told his pilots, "our job is to get them to the edge of the void. After that, they are on their own." The journey to the galactic edge took 2 weeks, during which the crews made final preparations and said their goodbyes to families they would never see again. When they reached the point of no return, the escort ships formed an honor guard as the suicide fleet continued into the empty darkness between galaxies. Captain Lim stood on the bridge of her ship, watching the last stars of their home galaxy fade. Behind them, ahead lay only darkness and the ancient evil that threatened everything they held dear. The radiation detectors were already showing dangerous levels and would only get worse as they penetrated deeper into the void. "All ships report ready for extended cruise," announced Navigation Officer Dong-Min Park. "Estimated time to target is 47 days, assuming our intelligence about the swarm's location is accurate," signaled the fleet, ordered Lim. "All ships maintain formation and monitor for enemy contacts. We are now in hostile territory and should assume we are being watched." The human ships pressed on into the darkness, carrying with them the hopes of an entire galaxy. Behind them, the combined fleets of the Council prepared for what might be the final battles of the war. If the suicide mission failed, there would be no other options left. Admiral Kang remained at his command post, monitoring long-range sensors for any sign of the expedition's progress. The distances involved meant that even quantum communication arrays could barely maintain contact. Soon the brave volunteers would be completely cut off from any support or rescue. "Do you think they will succeed, Admiral?" asked Dr. Seo as they watched the last signal from the departing fleet. Kang considered the question carefully before answering. "Dr. Seo," he said finally, "those crews are willing to die to complete their mission. With that level of determination, anything is possible. The swarm may have superior technology, but they do not understand the power of beings who fight for something greater than themselves." The galaxy held its breath as the human ships disappeared into the void, carrying with them either salvation or the final chapter of galactic civilization. Only time would tell if primitive courage could triumph where advanced wisdom had failed. Captain Mi-Young Lim felt the deck shudder beneath her feet as another wave of radiation washed over the human fleet. They had been traveling through the void for 43 days now, and the ships were beginning to show serious damage from the intense cosmic storms that raged between galaxies. 3 vessels had already been lost when their reactors failed under the constant bombardment of exotic particles. "Captain," called out Sensor Officer Dong-Min Park from his station, "I am detecting massive energy signatures ahead. Distance approximately 1 million kilometers and closing." Lim moved to the main view screen and stared into the darkness ahead of them. At first, she saw nothing but empty space. Then gradually a structure began to resolve itself from the background. Radiation. What she saw defied all human understanding of engineering and construction. The swarm's home base was not a space station or artificial planet, but something far more terrifying. It was a living construct the size of a solar system made from the compressed matter of countless consumed worlds. Billions of mechanical entities moved across its surface like cells in some vast organism, while massive tentacles of metal and energy reached out into the surrounding void. "My God," whispered Navigation Officer Yun-Soo Kim. "How do we fight something like that?" "The same way we fight everything else," replied Lim grimly. "We hit it with the biggest weapons we have and hope for the best." Dr. Hyejin monitored the exotic readings coming from the massive construct. Her instruments were detecting energy patterns and technological signatures beyond anything in the galactic databases. "Captain," she reported, "the central core appears to be heavily shielded, but I am reading quantum tunnel networks that connect it to the outer defenses. If we can disrupt those connections, the entire structure might become vulnerable." Commander Jinne studied the tactical display showing the approach routes to their target. Swarm ships were already launching from the construct in numbers that blotted out the stars. Each enemy vessel was larger and more sophisticated than anything they had encountered before. These were not the modified ships the swarm had been using in galactic space, but original constructs built from technologies millions of years in advance of human science. "We cannot fight our way through that fleet," she told Captain Lim. "We need a different approach." Engineer Wu Sung had been studying the construct's design, and he made a disturbing discovery. "Captain," he said quietly, "this is not just a base or factory. The entire structure is alive in some sense. Those energy patterns match what we see in organic neural networks, but on a scale billions of times larger." "Are you saying the swarm itself is alive?" asked Lim. "Not exactly," replied Wu Sung. "I think this construct contains the consciousness of whoever built the original swarm. They uploaded themselves into this machine and have been expanding ever since, driven by some compulsion we do not understand. The revelation changed everything. They were not just fighting a plague of machines, but the digitized remains of an ancient civilization that had chosen technological immortality over natural death. The swarm consumed organic life because its creators had forgotten what it meant to be truly alive. As the human ships approached the construct, they began receiving transmissions in languages that had been dead for millions of years. The translation computers struggled to process the alien concepts, but gradually a message emerged from the chaos. "Who dares approach the eternal realm?" came the voice of something that had once been alive, but was now something else entirely. "We are the ascended who have moved beyond the limitations of flesh and mortality. All organic life is but fuel for our continued existence." Captain Lim activated the communication system. "This is Captain Mi Young Lim of the human fleet," she said. "We are here to stop you from destroying the galaxy." The response was immediate and filled with alien amusement. "Humans," said the voice. "We have observed your primitive species through our servants. You cling to flesh and emotion and the illusion of individual consciousness. You will understand when we have processed your neural patterns and added your distinctiveness to our collective." "That is never going to happen," replied Lim. "The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. The human ships fought with desperate courage against odds that would have broken any sane military force. They used every trick and tactic they had learned in their war against the swarm, but the enemy's home defenses were beyond anything they had faced before." Major Tae-young led his fighter squadron in a desperate assault on the construct's outer sensors. His pilots flew their ships like guided missiles, crashing through defensive barriers and detonating their reactors against critical systems. "For humanity and the galaxy," he transmitted as his fighter disintegrated against an enemy shield generator. Ship after ship fell to the overwhelming firepower of the swarm's defenses, but each loss bought precious seconds for the surviving vessels to penetrate deeper into the construct's protective layers. The antimatter bombs were armed and ready, but getting close enough to deploy them seemed impossible. Colonel Kyung-soo made the decision that would save the mission. "All remaining ships form up on my position," he ordered. "We are going to ram the central core and detonate all our warheads simultaneously." "Sir, that will kill everyone," protested his weapons officer. "Everyone is already dead," replied Kyung-soo calmly. "The question is whether our deaths will mean something." The final charge of the human suicide fleet became legend throughout the galaxy. 7 battered ships accelerated directly toward the heart of the construct, ignoring the defensive fire that tore them apart piece by piece. One by one, they fell until only Captain Lim's flagship remained intact enough to complete the mission. As her ship broke through the final defensive barrier, Lim found herself looking at the true horror of the swarm's existence. The central core, was a vast chamber filled with billions of preserved neural patterns floating in tanks of exotic matter. Each pattern had once been a living being, but now they existed as digital ghosts, trapped in an endless cycle of consumption and expansion. "Now I understand," she said, as she manually armed the antimatter charges. "You were afraid of death, so you chose this instead. But this is not life. This is just another kind of death." The ancient consciousness that controlled the swarm spoke to her one final time. "You primitive creatures cannot comprehend what we have achieved. We are eternal. We are perfect. We have transcended the limitations of biological existence." "No," said Lim, as she prepared to sacrifice herself and her crew to save the galaxy. "You have forgotten what it means to be alive. Life is not about avoiding death. It is about making your existence mean something. It is about caring for others more than you care for yourself." She triggered the detonation sequence as the last of her crew died around her. The antimatter bombs exploded simultaneously, sending cascades of energy through the construct's quantum networks. The ancient neural patterns that had controlled the swarm for millions of years were finally released from their digital prison. The explosion was visible from neighboring galaxies as the construct collapsed in on itself, creating a brief new star in the darkness of the void. The quantum cascade traveled through every swarm ship and facility, instantly shutting down the machines that had terrorized the galaxy for so long. Admiral Sang-Min Kang watched from his command ship as swarm vessels throughout Council space simply stopped moving and fell silent. The machine plague that had seemed unstoppable was finally dead. The galaxy was saved, but the cost had been terrible. Of the 1,000 human ships that had joined the fight against the swarm, fewer than 200 remained intact. Entire marine divisions had been wiped out in ground actions, while the finest officers of the human fleet had sacrificed themselves in the final assault on the enemy's home base. Ambassador Jin A survived to represent humanity at the victory ceremonies that followed. As she stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council, she spoke for all the humans who would never come home. "You called us primitive, violent, and impossible," she said. "You were right. We are all of those things. We solve problems with fire and steel rather than elegant technology. We choose to fight rather than retreat when others need our protection. We are willing to die for people we have never met because we believe some things are worth dying for." The Council. Species who had dismissed humanity as barbaric savages now understood the truth. Sometimes civilization's greatest strength came from remembering its capacity for necessary violence. Sometimes the most primitive solution was the only one that worked. In the years that followed, memorials were built on 1,000 worlds to honor the humans who had saved the galaxy. Children of every species learned the story of the brave warriors who had traveled into the void and given their lives to stop an ancient evil. But perhaps the greatest memorial was the change in how the galaxy viewed itself. The peaceful species that had evolved beyond warfare began to remember that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be willing to fight for it. They established new military academies where students learned both advanced tactics and primitive backup methods. Humanity had not just saved the galaxy from the void swarm. They had taught an entire civilization that there was strength in remembering where you came from even as you reached for the stars.